Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. You can find out more about us at virginiainstitute.org and find out about our Tuesday morning group coalition meetings and all the things we're doing to affect public policy in a positive way. Our first guest this week is Secretary of State of the great state of West Virginia, or as a friend of mine once said over the last 4 years, Best Virginia. I think they were teasing us, but I'm not sure. Don't be confused. I'm not saying Mark Warner. This is Secretary of State Mac Warner. Mr. Secretary, thank you for taking some time out with us this week. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for making that clarification, because
yes.
There are some people get confused at times.
Well, and certainly one would hope that in the course of the conversation it would become apparent that you weren't Mark Warner. So now you're part of a group of secretaries of state from across the country who have signed a letter to President Biden asking him to rescind Executive Order 14019. Now, is that just his executive orders are already in the 14,000s, or is that over the entire history of the country? Because it seems like that's how many he's issued. And moreover, can you take us a little into what that particular one does?
I sure can, and I don't know whether that's in his term or throughout, but what that focuses on is that was President Biden's overreach of the federal government to try to get inside the voter registration process. And this is something that is the prerogative of the states. It's clear that that is done so in the U.S. Constitution, that the time, manner, and place of elections shall be left to the state legislatures. And so what we've seen is an effort by this current administration to overreach, with their H.R. 1, the For the People's Act, all these things that are misnamed. It's amazing how they misname these acts that they push out. But these are attempts by the federal government to overtake the whole process. What they got away with in the 2020 election in a number of different states, they tried to codify and push through federal legislation. And those efforts failed. So this was their second attempt at that, and that is to come back through federal agencies. And there's as many as 600 of these federal agencies. And what this executive order does is requests each one of those federal agencies to come up with their plan as to how to register voters for anybody who comes in and uses their services. And think about that. And the best example that people can relate to immediately is the Department of Motor Vehicles. Is right now, through the 1993 National Voter Registration Act, there was an agreement made that kind of a two-part thing. One is that the Democrats would get everybody who comes into DMV gets a chance to register to vote. And then what the Republicans or conservatives got is that every 2 years that there would be an effort to clean up the voter registration rolls in all the states. Well, the problem is there's no enforcement mechanism to that cleaning up the voter registration list. So if a Secretary of State wasn't interested in that, they just wanted to let those rolls get bloated, they could do so. That's what happened here in the state of West Virginia. Since I've taken office, I've had to take off with the county clerks 380,000 names of people. That's how bloated these have gotten. That's about 1 in 4. That's how bloated it had gotten here in West Virginia. And back in 1993, we didn't have the personal computers and the internet connectivity. Since then, technology has overtaken that, the purpose behind that national act. And so now you can register online 24/7, that sort of thing. There's no reason to go through the Department of Motor Vehicles to get registered anymore. But what this executive order does is try to take that in just the DMV and now expand it across 600 federal agencies.
Wow.
So think about this. The Department of Health and Human Services for any welfare or health care activity, for HUD, for housing, for Department of Agriculture and food stamps. Every time you go into any one of those, there would be this plan in place to get you to register. And think of the potential for misuse of that. And it's that being someone being told, hey, if you want to use these services, you have to register to vote, or here's your opportunity to register, and you put that out as part of the packages as you go in to sign up for their registration and so forth. Well, think of that. You go in, and in one agency you register as John Smith, and the next agency you go in, for housing, and you register as John L. Smith, and you go in another time and it's John Lewis Smith. Now, all of those are coming to the county clerk or the Secretary of State's office, and it's up to those overworked and underpaid county clerks now to straighten that out. Which one of those do you want to register under? And what if they put a post office box in one and a physical address in another? My clerks are going berserk over this thing. There's no way they want that sort of thing. And the main point is, it's an overreach of the federal government. Let the Secretary of State do what we do, let Department of Motor Vehicles do what they do, let HUD do what they do, but don't complicate things. And it's an overreach. These are the type things. There was a recent case, with the EPA, West Virginia versus EPA, and it said if this is a major action, okay, it's up to the purview of Congress to do this, not the federal agency to make these determinations on their own. It's not for the President of the United States to overstep his bounds, overstep Congress's bounds, and start making these federal agencies voter registration centers. The Congress says it should be, the Constitution says it should be left to the states. Let's leave it with the states and keep the government acting in its own, put some boundaries on this, and let us each do what we're designed to do, and not adhere to this. So anyway, 15 states have gotten together, sent a letter to the president asking him to rescind this order. Let's not put this burden on these agencies. They're working hard enough as it is, but let's not turn them all into voter registration agencies.
Secretary of State Mac Warner from West Virginia is on with us on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. As Secretary, one of the things that first pops to my mind, it would take, quite, well, I guess it would make it quite easier for a group, let's say, of the Center for Technology and Public Engagement, the Zuckerbucks people, to come in and say, well, you look overworked. How about we give you some of our staff to help out and maybe throw a few dollars into your coffers, which is, as I understand it, how they got into all those urban area election offices. They helped by going out and doing voter registration. This just seems to make it even easier for them.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because you're exactly right. This is Zuckerbucks 2.0. What they got away with in 2020, people didn't anticipate this. Zuckerberg put in $400 million, and it was under the guise of, let's give everybody, these states, an opportunity to get PPE, the personal protective equipment, because we're under COVID-19, and it was all innocuous. And so some of these secretaries, including Republican secretaries, took this money. Well, what we saw happened is that was pushed down to specific precincts or specific counties in swing states. And so we're talking like Philadelphia and Detroit and Maricopa County, where it would turn out to be a get out the Democrat vote effort is what it turned out to be. And so now the states are on to that. The states are coming back with their own legislative initiatives to stop Zuckerbucks, and so they know that they're getting shut down on the Zuckerberg's effort. And so now this is Biden's administration taking on this in another format and saying exactly what you just proposed, and that is, let's use these bucks and let's use these people to get out the vote, and we're going to do it through these federal agencies. So if you want these federal agencies' help, you're going to register to vote, and you know that this is a get out the effort. The vote effort for the liberal causes, progressive causes, and not necessarily the conservatives. And that's not the role of government. The government, my role and the role of election officials across the United States is to run free and fair elections. It's not to put the thumb on the scale and help one side versus the other. The politics come off when we step onto those state house grounds and start running these elections. And that's the way we're going to restore confidence in the elections. What these efforts do is destroy that confidence, and it makes people say, well, why should I even go participate to vote? These votes are getting stolen or the elections are rigged, and we need to get away from that.
It's passive voter suppression, in my mind anyway, Mr. Secretary. And beyond that, I noticed that they never go through agencies that are giving out hunting licenses or concealed carry permits to do voter registration. I didn't, when I got my CCP, I didn't get a voter registration sheet.
Exactly. But you can imagine somebody sitting there going into a housing or a food stamp or health care, Medicare, or child care type situation, and as part of the incoming packet being handed a voter registration form. And that's nothing more than let's get out the progressive or the liberal folks, just get them on the rolls. That's what they want. They just want to get them on the rolls. Now we'll use Zuckerbucks or some other effort to get them to get out the vote, get them on election day and that sort of thing. We'll use social media and start hammering their social media posts with, hey, today's election day, get out and vote, and that sort of thing. It's all combined together. Puts the thumb on the scale, on that progressive side, and we don't need or want that. That's what destroys our confidence in the elections.
West Virginia Secretary of State Mac Warner is on with us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Another thing we saw in the 2020 elections was these non-governmental organizations sending out pre-filled out absentee ballots to voters and then marking down which ones got returned so they could use them again. And there's still investigations going on in, I believe, Wisconsin as well as Georgia into, whether or not these were actually the people or somehow they decided they'd proxy vote for them. And I can see this scenario under this executive order that you're asking the president to rescind, opening the door wide for that kind of thing as well.
You're absolutely correct. And that's why the gold standard, and this is coming from the Carter Election Center, okay, down in Atlanta, Georgia. Okay, Jimmy Carter and Jimmy Baker were put together after the 2000 election. There's much concern about what happened in Florida and the hanging chads and so forth. And they have this experience from across the globe. And they came out and they said the gold standard in voting is to vote in person on Election Day under the watchful eye of trained observers from both parties. That's what we all need to move towards. And exactly the opposite is what's happening with the progressive movement in America today, and that is the vote by mail, using drop boxes, no excuse absentee voting, expansive early voting, all those kinds of things. And we need to get back as close as we can. If you're going to deviate from voting in person, then there should be a reason for it. And here in West Virginia, our legislature has done a wonderful job of balancing the access with the security. So we allow absentee voting, but you have to meet one of 11 stated reasons by the state legislature to request an absentee ballot. And what we saw with COVID, we happened to be in a unique situation where we were under a stay-at-home order by the governor. And that's the type thing in a COVID or an emergency situation. Now you have to adapt to that. Well, we had one party that was ready to send out these applications to all of its members, but the other party wasn't ready to do that, or the funding, or thought that was inappropriate. And so I had to step in and make this judgment call to send out applications to everybody, because that's the only way to keep it fair. But before I did that, I went to the leaders of both the Republican and Democrat Party. I went to the Attorney General for an opinion. I went to the leaders of the House and the Senate and the governor. We got everybody together on that before I made that judgment call. What happened in other states is you had election officials who made these determinations on their own, say in Pennsylvania, to accept ballots 3 days after the election when the state law says it has to be in by Election Day. And that's what we all have to do. Or in Michigan or in Wisconsin and other places, they made agreements that they would accept ballots without signatures. I mean, how absurd is that?
You bring up the COVID excuse, and I've always wondered, and I have plenty of friends who are lawyers, and I try not to talk law with them because I like to enjoy my spare time. But one of the things that always has puzzled me is we watched here in Virginia, our state-run alcohol distributors were open, but our churches were closed. We couldn't vote in person, but we could go to Walmart and the grocery store. And I said, was it a matter of liability? Did they not want to put state employees at the polling places in jeopardy of getting sick, but they didn't care about the grocery store employees? Because I said, maybe we should just deputize Kroger and let them run the elections, because it seemed like, even on busy days, you got through there pretty quickly.
Well, you're showing the absurdity of some of these decisions, and it all gets back to the role of the election official to keep it fair. And what the point that I was driving at earlier is the progressives have taken all these things that they got away with, a little bit in Georgia, a little bit in Wisconsin, a little bit in Pennsylvania, and they put that all into one effort. And think about the hundreds of drop boxes and ballots that got stuffed or trafficked and stuffed in there, when a state law in West Virginia, you can only take two, yours and your spouse's or whatever. You can only take two hand-delivered ballots. You can't take a stack of 100 from a nursing home or whatever. That's ballot trafficking. And so that's what we all need to do, is go back and look at what states and parties got away with in the 2020 election and say, hold it. Do we want that to happen in the 2024 election? No, that caused so much concern. There's still, as you said, arguments going on around the United States. You have a lot of these people running for Secretary of State in these states that are saying, we're going to do things differently. And I encourage that. We need to go back and review that. Because what's happening is that mainstream media is all saying, hey, nothing to see here, move on. Or if there was cheating, it wasn't enough to overturn the election. Well, how absurd is that? How much cheating do you allow? You had a race right there in the state of Virginia that they decided by a coin flip, a congressional seat.
We got lucky on that one. But let me ask you, on that, though, when you see groups like the Open Society and the Tides Foundation, all these left-leaning world government, World Economic Forum funded kind of organizations, these NGOs, who are promoting the progressive prosecutors and have realized how inexpensive it is to get a bunch of Commonwealth attorneys here in Virginia, I presume district attorneys, and even down ballot, executive, as in Secretary of State or attorneys general elected. It's much less expensive than trying to get a member of Congress elected or a senator. And so they've invested all their money in these little elections that nobody's paying attention to. It's almost like what they did in Philadelphia with the voter get out. They said, well, Joe Biden's going to win Philadelphia anyway. We're just going to run up the numbers so that Trump couldn't win Pennsylvania to overcome the amount of people that turned out in Philadelphia and hope nobody noticed.
Exactly. And that's what the Zuckerbucks was designed to do, is target those specific areas. So you just have to overturn a few precincts in a few key counties, and you have the result that you just described. And that's why we all have to remain vigilant. It's why I love talking with folks like you who are getting out the word and saying, look, we need to clean this up. I use example. I have a military background, and in the military, when I was coming through, there were drug issues. And how did the Army address it? They addressed it with urinalysis tests. If you didn't do a urinalysis test, if you didn't test your unit, you came out with 100%. You looked good on paper, but boy, are you ready to go to war with people? In many of these cases, 20-30% of the unit was actually using drugs, LSD, all kinds of mind-altering substances. Gosh. And so the urinalysis helped turn us on to that. Now you started showing on reports, my unit's 10% short or whatever. It looked bad on paper, but man, if you're ready to get on those airplanes and deploy somewhere, you have a higher degree of confidence that the ones that are getting on that planes are the one you're ready to go to war with. Mm-hmm. My analogy here is we need to be looking for these things in the election arena. If you don't look for it, you're not going to find it. We need to be looking for it, sorting it out. And it's why we here in West Virginia have adopted something we call see something, text something. Every person with an iPhone becomes an extension of my investigation department. And if you see something at a polling location, somebody's twisting an arm, somebody's buying something, exchanging food for a vote, any of those sorts of things, handing somebody a ballot to take in, all of that sort of thing, I want them to take a picture of it and send it to me. And then I've quadrupled the number of investigators we have throughout the state so we can put somebody on it immediately. And this is why West Virginia has risen to the top nationally with its election integrity programs, because people know that we're taking it serious. We've taken those names off the voter registration list. We're going after fraud. I love it when somebody reports that there's fraud, because I can get after it and ferret it out. And when I do it in that one county, it sends a message to all the other counties. Right. So I'm not afraid of that criticism or of people reporting fraud. I encourage it.
Well, and it's also important for listeners to say that you need to be involved. We need people to be those poll watchers. Here, I don't know, West Virginia, what your election season looks like. We're trying to pare it down, and we need to get more level-headed people in our General Assembly to do so. But it's 45 days. Voting begins on September 23rd. It's insane to try to get enough voluntary poll watchers and election officials for that. But it's what needs to be done, at least until we can right some of these ships, isn't it, Secretary of State Warner?
Absolutely, and I'm glad you pointed that out. Folks, the best way to gain confidence in the election process is to be a part of the process, be a poll worker, be an observer, get out there and participate, be a part of a community action team that is part of watching the election process and reporting back to your Secretary of State. And I know that you all changed your government. We have much more hope for Virginia now with Governor Youngkin in there, and be a part of that effort. And you're going to restore confidence in the elections in Virginia by doing so.
Yes, we have to do that. Win, lose, or draw. We have to have faith that the votes are legit. And I appreciate everything you do. Where's the best place for folks to go and read the letter you sent? I don't know if we've signed on to it here in Virginia yet, but I'd like to see folks emailing Governor Youngkin to get on the same letter, or at least Attorney General Miyares to get on this, and to try to get as a signatory on this if we're not already.
Absolutely. I'll have my communications director, Mike Queen, to get that to you so you can get it out. But if somebody wants to go see it right now, you can go to my website, wvsos.gov, and we have a copy of it there. I'll tell you another one that I just put out here yesterday. It's a slightly different effort, but that is SLAP, the State Legislative Accountability Program, and that's our pledge. And that's where we're asking senators and senatorial candidates to pledge that they will represent the state and not their personal interests or their party interests. And you can see with my Senator Manchin, what he just did. Why I am initiating this effort is because the role of the Senate is different than the role of House of Representatives.
Amen.
The House of Representatives is the people's house. It's closest to the people. But the senators are supposed to represent the states, and it's completely different, a different concept. And I think a lot of our senators either have never learned it, or they've forgotten it, or they purposely ignore it, and they take off on their own personal tangents. And what this pledge does is says, I pledge that if ever my state legislature has a vote of no confidence of 2/3 or more, that they would immediately resign their position and let the governor and the legislature appoint somebody new. And what it does is it holds them accountable throughout their entire 6-year term. They can't just do their own thing for 4 or 5 years and then get tuned into the people in the election year. And so that's something else that people may want to look into.
That's great. I wholeheartedly support it. I mean, I'd rather it go back to where it was when the Constitution was written. You know, the governor appoints, the legislature approves, and then they go and serve, because they've become super legislators now. They pander at election time and then go work counter to the voters. I love the idea of a vote of no confidence, and I wish you the best of luck. We'd sign on that in a heartbeat, because you have to hold accountable these folks, especially when they changed it 100 years ago and turned them into popular elections. They should have shortened the term from 6 years.
Right. They changed the entire structure, and now the states don't have that power that they had when this country was formed. The country was formed by a collection of states, a confederation of states. It wasn't the people, it was the states. And the great compromise of 1787 was we're going to have one house to represent the states and one house to represent the people. And like you said, in 1913, that changed. What this will do, basically, for your listeners, is this will return power to the 10th Amendment that says the states, everything that isn't designated to the federal government by the Constitution, shall be left to the states. And this will re-energize that whole effort. We've moved too far away from it, and that's why we find ourselves in the state that we're in today.
Secretary of State Mac Warner, not Mark, Mac, and the great state of Best Virginia, as it was named during the Northam administration, at least. But we're trying to catch back up to you here. But we appreciate everything that you've done so far, and we really appreciate your time this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
Absolutely, Joe. Great being with you.